Okay, I think, yeah, we are live. So today is a special one, you guys, on lifestyle medicine. My dear amigo, Kai Van Bodhi, who, man, we've had a good run, man, over the years, to say the least. We've been through acupuncture school together, lived together, which was awesome and rough sometimes, but overall, a hell of an experience. So, Kai, you do a lot of things, and you've got a pretty good following, and people, I think, know what you do to a degree, but there's a lot of people that are going to listen to this who don't know who you are, what you're doing. So can you kind of give us a backdrop on, like your background, Chinese medicine, and then where you've gone in recent years, because that's a pretty new development and a pretty cool shift.
Yeah, I'm happy to. So, I started out as a very, I'd say, non-holistic person. And, I grew up in New Jersey, and I was in a fraternity in college, and I was your typical American, living on beer and buffalo wings, and which I still have occasionally.
As you should, right?
As you should, yeah. And what really got me on my path was that my mother was suffering from a lot of different ailments, and I loved her dearly, and I wasn't able to convince her to shift her lifestyle into something that would have extended her life and her sanity and her sovereignty. And that was very influential. And then right in the middle of her deterioration, my brother was diagnosed with ALS, or Lou Gehrig's disease.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I was teaching at-risk youth at the time. I had a background in psychology, and I was working with troubled kids as a school teacher. My co-teacher got cancer. And I found myself drawn so deeply to holistic medicine only because I saw all these cases of people that I cared about that had no real hope from Western medicine.
Yeah.
And that led me to finish college, work for a couple years, and move to China. Because, essentially I had seen too many Kung Fu movies.
Steven Seagal, Marked for Death.
Exactly. Yep. And not to forget The Perfect Weapon.
Weapon.
I've turned into about half of The Perfect Weapon at this point.
Jeff Speakman.
We'll tell you more about that later if you want to know. It's not a compliment to me. Anyway, Gray has a certain oracle ability to determine whether or not an 80s and 90s Kung Fu star is currently super fat or still fit. He can do it like that without seeing any pictures. He just knows. So anyway, so I moved to China very naively, and I ended up staying for 7 years. And that was where I really started to wake up and grow up. Like, I had my first cell phone. I learned to navigate a city on a bicycle with just a Chinese dictionary and a map. And
can I ask a quick question on that? When you went to China, Kai, when you say you just up and left for China, was that, I guess, where you were in your life? Was that a directive that, like, retreat because you didn't know what to do, or was that I'm going there to learn Chinese medicine and pick up things from the Asian culture? Like, where were you?
Yeah, I actually, kind of like the hero's journey, I had a woman that I loved. I had a job at a school. They were offering to put me through to get my master's degree in psychology, to be a counselor, on scholarship in Virginia. And my girlfriend wanted to marry me. So I had everything laid out in front of me. And I was spending all of my extra money on qigong class, yoga class, hypnosis. I lived in a little conservative town in Virginia,
right.
And I had this insatiable thirst for the experience of human potential. And it just that out of all of it, I remember when it happened, like literally I watched a documentary on qigong, and I literally was barely able to pay my rent. And they were like, qigong is practiced every morning in the parks all across China for no charge. And I was like, dude, what am I doing? Like, I knew I wanted to go all the way down the rabbit hole.
Right.
Yeah, I didn't know I wanted to become an acupuncturist or herbalist. I didn't know that. I just knew I wanted to go find a spiritual teacher, live with them, train with them. That's all I knew.
Fair enough.
Yeah, so I made the choice to go. It felt like, even though I was giving up and gambling, it felt like I'd rather know the answer than settle for what I've got here.
I can relate.
But it was painful. It was painful for sure.
Was the pain you're talking about when you went to China, do you mean the cultural integration, or do you mean the process of learning this stuff and what it really requires of you?
I think, I remember we were at there's two parts. The answer's both.
Okay.
So the first part was, I was hanging out on this intentional community that had all those eco-friendly houses, and they had sweat lodges, and the guy that was the patriarch and his wife were like really wisdom keepers. Like, Caucasian people studied with indigenous people, were living off the grid in a different way, but I just found so much sanity in their lifestyle.
Yeah.
And I literally went there for a retreat, and there was a spiritual teacher that they had living there as a guest. He literally told me, that woman's your soulmate and you're supposed to marry her. Mm. And I went out to my car. I had a Ford Explorer. I got in my car. I put on some music. I started crying, and I checked in with myself. And I just had this truth, even if that guy's right, and even if I'm making the biggest mistake of my life, my truth is I would rather go to China and find out than not.
Yeah.
So that was the first pain. It wasn't like all signs point to go into China.
Right.
It was just internally. The second thing was, and we can dig into this more, when I got to China, I was celibate and vegetarian, and I didn't drink alcohol, and I was sick for a fucking year. Yeah. I'm not sure if we're allowed to curse on the podcast.
Oh, you can definitely curse on the podcast.
Okay. So I was sick, man. It was like upper respiratory infection. And then when that would clear, I would get either diarrhea or constipation. And it just kept the metal element just back and forth. And I did IV antibiotics. I did Chinese medicine. I did acupuncture. I did everything. Nothing got me better. And I'll just share this piece until one day, I'm in this little communist city called Zunyi in the middle of fucking nowhere, because I picked it because there was no Walmart, no McDonald's, there was no Western infiltration.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there with my Chinese medicine teacher who I've hired as a tutor, and he said, man's destiny and potential and health will always be tied to nature. And so there are certain places where you can't separate the environment and the constitution from health. And I said, I was very hungry for truth. And I was like, so I'm so sick here. Is there a place in China that would suit my constitution? And he said, oh, yeah, this is the worst place for you to live in China. It's damp. There's coal pollution. It's
no good.
It's cold. He's like, you need to be in a warm, dry, windy place. I was like, where's that? And why didn't you tell me sooner?
Yeah. Why are you holding out, bro?
He said you should go to Yunnan province, to Kunming. And I literally went to my teacher. I said, look, I've been sick for like almost a year. I'm out of here.
Yeah.
And I left the safety of the school to go to another province. And I was never sick again in China, seriously. And I also started drinking and dating.
Yeah.
So it was also like I was limiting my experience. I was going against my innate constitution, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and this points to we could obviously, between you and I, Kai, we could just jump in 50 different directions right now. But I want to jump just on this, what you just talked about, because it's a really important thread, I think, to the way you approach Chinese medicine, the way I approach it too, in some ways, is this idea that if you're too clean, if the edges are too finely contained, right? If we color just perfectly inside the lines, for a lot of us, that control, that tension of trying to do it, quote unquote, the right way or the spiritual way, there's usually some kind of stagnation that comes from it. There's a life current, at least mine. We talked about this when I just talked about you recently on the podcast with another guest, and I was telling the story about how when you and I lived together, one of the first questions that I posed to you, I said, Kai, do you drink? Do you drink beer, or do you engage in any kind of like thing like that? Because I wasn't sure if you were like the super uber Taoist, celibate guy, and you're like, I've been through that, and I would prefer to have a little bit of alcohol. I would prefer to a little bit of these things in my life because I feel better when done in moderation. And I think that's what do you think about that? Because people, there's a backlash sometimes. People think, oh, if you're gonna drink alcohol, or if you're going to do these things on the sidelines a little bit, like what's your take on that? Because it's never worked for me. When I try to do that, I don't feel particularly good or on point.
Well, yeah, I mean, the first thing I'll say is like, there's a path for everyone. And I think some people, just like I've seen raw foodists, like my friend Pagan George, who lives in LA, who's just super fucking healthy, looks 10 years younger than he is, or maybe even 15. And he thrives on raw food.
Yep. And
I've seen people that are, their diet is perfect and they're raw food and they're sickly.
Yeah.
Super sickly, blood deficient, all that.
Yep.
So first of all, there's no one answer. Secondly, what attracted me to the Taoist path is that most Taoists do drink. Mm-hmm. And when they drink, they don't eat rice because they only want to have a certain amount of grain.
Right.
Most Taoists that drink also get up the next day and still train Tai Chi at the same time in the morning. That's their commitment.
Right.
And if they're not transmuting the amount of libations, then it shows up in their practice the next day, and there's an automatic course correction.
Right.
So, and I love that. Taoists have sex, they cook, they do calligraphy,
Yep.
and they put their spirit into it fully, and I love that about them.
Me too.
And I guess ultimately it's a choice. I mean, I'll be really honest. Like, I think if I had to wave a wand, I'd rather never drink and never eat any kind of junk food and be as happy and joyful and jubilant as I am now.
Yeah.
But I'll be honest, I don't know how to do that because honestly, I love East Coast pizza.
Yeah.
And I love buffalo wings, and I want to be able to walk into a town and find the coolest little hole in the wall and eat there and enjoy it and not pay for it the next day.
Absolutely.
And for the most part, I can do that because I train, because I do fast, because I do take digestive enzymes and probiotics, because I do clean my colon out on a regular basis. I can do all that, and I think I'm So that's my answer.
It's a good answer. My sentiments are very similar, and I remember years back when I did vegan for my early 20s. I did veganism for 2 years, and I remember I was getting to that point. Some people, when they do veganism, they start to get to that militant place. They start to get to that militant place of, this is the only way, this is the dogmatic way, and I was starting to hang out with that group of people, and my mom just stopped me one day, and she's like, Gray, what if you travel to Italy and you meet a 90-year-old man and he's serving lamb and red wine because it's the local thing that they just slaughtered that morning? Are you going to shut down these experiences because of, a food ethic? And it got me thinking. It was a great, simple question. And I remember thinking, no, I'm probably going to eat the lamb. I'm probably going to jump in on board, but live life. Yeah. Not hold it too tight, which I think is really good. Yeah. And it seems like people that are in the health field, at least the clients I work with and the people that I talk to, they like it that there's a little bit of what you would call normalcy. You can still live life and still do some of these things. But it's like you said, if you know how to tip the scales the other way, if you know how to balance life and nourish life appropriately, then when you do these things, there's not going to be this demonstrable hit where you're completely wiped out, which I think is it's a good idea for a lot of people, because I don't think people are hip to it. They don't think that you can tip the scale one way, to counteract.
Yeah.
So with this, type of thinking, Kai, and like what you're doing now, Chinese medicine, how are you applying this? Because I know you've moved into, like I said, new territory. What's this look like for you in real time now as you're working with people?
Well, I got connected to a group of conscious entrepreneurs. And I really came in through one of the leaders of them, who's like a really, him, but I don't want to say any names, but he's like a really young, spiritually open-minded, but really good at business. And in my opinion, has a really solid channel to spirit. And he asked me at one point to come to an event for all these entrepreneurs and to help them understand how to have sustainable peak performance.
Yep.
Then that was the beginning for me. That's when I started to really think about how do I bring Chinese medicine principles into peak performance so people can utilize them.
Right.
And that's the origin of my tonic. So I think this is a good place to start from. I realized all they want is more energy, more clarity, more focus. More energy, more clarity, more focus. Get more shit done. Get more shit done. I realized that. And as I looked around at biohacking, and if we need to define that, we can, but just ways of getting more out of the human body and the human mind, I saw that it was rife with unsustainable practices. They were draining the kidneys. They were lighting up the spirit and the consciousness without replenishing.
Right.
So I found a formula that's designed to strengthen the kidneys and thereby the willpower, and another formula that's designed to protect and anchor the heart and stabilize emotions, and then another one that, takes the mind and keeps it open and clear, but roots it down into the water of the kidneys. And that was Pearl Shen, Will Strengthener, and Tao in a Bottle. Mm-hmm. And I brought them together. I made tonics. People were lit up on these tonics, man. Yep. They were like near psychedelic.
Yeah. And
it was an accident. It was. I just literally was like, I want to give them what they actually need rather than what they want. I didn't go with Supreme Shen drops or Super Yang Jing, because they're already burning too much.
Yeah.
So when I saw how that tonic worked for them, And I noticed that a lot of them were trapped between caffeine and cannabis, one as an upper, one as a downer.
Yep.
Other people, it's caffeine and alcohol.
For sure.
I would just recognize that Chinese medicine has a lot to offer in terms of the balance of being able to have your energy, clarity, and focus and put reserves back in your bank account.
Yeah. That's a big one.
And I think like just knowing that you get to have both, I think that is the nature of my whole system, is that you get to have performance now and longevity later, and it just takes a little investment of time, learning, money, and support.
Right. Absolutely. There's an educational piece in there about how to navigate this stuff, because I think a lot of people don't, especially in American culture. These ideas. And to backtrack a little bit to the people listening, what Kai was talking about. So the Tao in a bottle, what did you say? What were the other two?
It's called Will Strengthener now. And then the other one is called Pearl Shen.
Pearl Shen. So these are formulas. These are herbal decoctions that you can get through Ron Teagarden, who's a master tonic herbalist. He's just probably the best tonic herbalist, I think, probably in the world. He's just got quality that's amazing product. So these things that Kai is talking about are these formulas that people take that address different aspects and different organs, different emotional pieces. And the piece that Kai touched on, which I think is important to consider because Western medicine doesn't really have a counterpoint, is that when Kai was talking about the kidneys and willpower, the Chinese medicine, the way they see it is that the emotions or the spirit comes through the prism of the flesh. It comes through the body. And then different organ systems process different emotions. And so the willpower is housed by the kidneys. So one of the things that's cool about your work, I mean, and I love about Chinese medicine, is when you see people that have no willpower, you know which substances, herbs, and lifestyle practices that will actually replenish the kidneys from a different lens. Because people don't think about that, beyond eating corn silk and, doing some, baking soda and water to clean your kidneys. There's not a lot in the West in terms of looking at it through this other lens. So it's really powerful. So now that with these tonics, what are you seeing in the entrepreneurs that you are working with? Give me some of I would love to hear some of the feedback that you've seen and heard from people who are pushing really hard. And then with the inclusion of some of these Chinese medicine principles, what are you seeing in their bodies, in their experience? What's happening?
Well, I mean, for one thing, you can make them just like you've been getting into functional medicine testing. And most of these entrepreneurs at some point get functional medicine testing if they're going to work with me for 6 months or so.
Right.
But I think the key is that for them, what's appealing is that they can just add. So our culture is all about addition.
Yep.
Do more, take more, that is probably unsustainable for the most part. However, if I want to like plugging into that mentality, adding a tonic is like the easiest thing you can do.
Yeah.
That doesn't take much effort and time, that will actually take the place of your morning beverage of coffee or tea. But over time, we're going to see their adrenal levels improve. They're going to start to sleep better. They're going to start to have less of an energy lag in the afternoon. This is all things they've reported.
Right.
They're going to not need a second cup of coffee in the afternoon. And I think the biggest thing that I notice, and this opens up the whole door to adaptogens, is that after about 3 weeks of steadily drinking a morning tonic with the right herbs, they start to experience that they're dealing with stress in a different way.
Yeah.
Something happens that they would normally have a painful or unresourceful response, and now all of a sudden they have a nuanced response to it.
That's exactly right.
and that's phenomenal. I mean, that's what an adaptogen is, right? It teaches the body to improve a non-specific response to stress. Mm-hmm. So literally improves how we handle toxic stress in the environment, like that level, mental stress and emotional stress.
Right.
Adaptogens are able to do all three. And I love diving into the science of that. But basically, as your adrenal reserves are replenished, you have more immunity, more patience, more ability to stand in the fire of stressful stimulus and not just have one reaction. That's probably not a resourceful. You have a choice of reactions.
Yes. Well, you've got more in the tank to play with. You actually have reserves where you're not just going to be falling into depletion or overtaxing the bank account. So, Kai, when we're talking about tonics and we're talking about caffeine, people, I talk to people about this idea, but I would love to hear your take on it, because there are people listening that are saying, what the hell is a tonic, first of all? And two, what's wrong with just drinking Red Bull and coffee to keep my energy up? Because that is the stimulant sort of thing that we do. And not to mention, Adderall is circulated so heavily through the culture. There's a lot of speedy, fast methamphetamine type stimulants that we are sort of addicted to. So when people say that to you, well, why can't I just drink Red Bull and coffee and have that be my energy for the day? What's the cost of that, and where and why are tonics superior in that process?
Well, I mean, like it's like a story. Caffeine has no innate energy in it. Caffeine goes to the kidneys and tells them to release adrenaline.
Yep.
It's actually a toxin. Mm-hmm. That's part of how adrenaline gets released.
Yeah.
Now, I happen to have a good relationship with it, because there's ways to mitigate that.
Yep.
But ultimately, caffeine and coffee especially is going to, on a long-term basis, it's going to make your bones less dense. It's going to increase inflammation in the body. It's going to lead toward early stage adrenal fatigue, which means that you're going to be weaker, more tired, your immune system will be compromised. So caffeine and Red Bull are not a sustainable pathway of energy. You will eventually pay a price.
Yep.
So that's just truth. Like you can check me on that, you can research it, but that's the truth.
Yeah.
So and then Red Bull, you have sugar, so now you have diabetes and a tendency toward metabolic syndrome, which is just like all of the stress chemicals are amping up, and you're kind of pre-diabetic, pre-heart disease. It's all of these conditions that in Japan, they have a diagnosis of like hyperactivity of the autonomic nervous system. That's a diagnosis that they'll look for in the 30s and 40s, and they'll use natural methods to offset it.
Right.
Okay. It's basically like, we don't screen for early stage adrenal fatigue. We don't screen for that as a standard practice in Western medicine.
Correct.
But we can know. So what is a tonic, and what's the value of a tonic? Tonify means to strengthen the function. Caffeine does not strengthen the function. It just causes it does by causing the body to release, but the function of the kidneys is actually depleted. Mm-hmm. So the next best level is if caffeine is like a soldier that's going to go rally the troops inside your body. Adding a tonic is like sending that caffeine with a backpack of food and rations. And as those soldiers come out of the kidneys, he's feeding them.
Yeah.
And and then when the kidneys are depleted because they've dispatched their soldiers, he's going to even put some soldiers and food back in the kidneys so that they're more up to strength.
Yeah.
So L-theanine is going to mitigate some of the problems that caffeine has. It's going to lower the dip, increase your focus, take the jitteriness out, and most importantly, it's going to clean up the cortisol arc.
Yeah.
Now, one thing that we could do a whole podcast on, I'm not prepared for it today, but cortisol is not the enemy. Mm-hmm. You need cortisol to wake up.
You do.
You need cortisol to get shit done.
Right.
Chronic levels of cortisol in the body constantly, that's the enemy.
Right.
So now tonic herbs or some of these adaptogens we're talking about, even beyond mitigating the cortisol spike and then also the drop of energy, these are actually things that after a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, you're going to actually have more net energy in the body than you had before you started taking them. So 100%. These are literally deposits in the bank account.
Yep.
You're not expecting to feel it on day 1. You're feeling it around day 21.
Right.
And day 91. And now it's really, and that's another piece is like understanding how long herbs take to build up and have their result in the body. That's important to know and to understand.
Right, because I think the culture is collectively a quick hit, sort of fast pace. I want it right now. And if it's not happening now, it's not working, and this is horseshit, I'm not going to do it.
The other side of that with some of my entrepreneurial clients is that they're taking $500 to $1,000 worth of supplements a month, and they don't even know what's doing what anymore.
Right.
So that's the opposite person that just throws money at herbs and nutraceuticals, and they can't even make a connection between that money and any positive benefit in their life. Someone told them to take it.
Right.
That's something that I'm working to help them understand, to like go down to the minimum doses of what's actually moving the needle and evaluate it.
Well, and it's less overwhelm for the body. There's so, you know, the body has to process, the physical body has to process all of these different things. Your liver, your kidneys, everything's processing everything. It's like using too many acupuncture needles or overloading the body the same way, right? You have less is often more. Well, I can tell you, because you were the first person to get me into tonics. I mean, we learned about them in school and there was exposure to them, but when we were living together, I remember you diving really deep into Ron Teagarden stuff, and you were, hence your nickname Latte, because you always made those amazing tonic creamy beverages with all these amazing, you know, coconut milk and herbs and cinnamon. And I remember thinking, like, good God, like these are delicious, first of all, which is, I think, really important to get people to increase compliance, is when things taste good. Because if they taste terrible, you don't go for it at all. You want to interject? I have more to say, but yeah.
No, same way. I just want to say, like, that's part of what what's part of what you taught me through your Lillian Bridges transmission, is just like how the positive neurotransmitters that are produced by the joy of drinking a beverage that tastes good is by itself has intrinsic value.
Oh yeah.
So now even if that beverage was neutral to your health,
correct,
but you felt good and you were happy and it tastes. So there's like all that ling or whatever you want to call that, you know.
Yeah.
Now, and I really think this is kind of the essence of who I am. Now, add on to that it's tasting delicious and it's going to give you energy now, and your adrenals are going to be replenished. Oh shit, dude, that's what I call a value proposition. Right there, dude.
Oh yeah. Well, it's a win-win, because if you're a foodie like myself and yourself, who we love food, eating tasty things, I think that's a huge piece, and it's true for a lot of people, even if they're not foodies. Just the fact that it tastes good and can be good for you, I think, should be the high aim of a lot of health advocates and people who are cooking and doing these things. But I can tell you that when I started dabbling in tonics, there was a trend that I would notice pretty quickly that would have this huge uptick in certain areas of my body, right? Like libido would go up, mental clarity would go up, physical strength or endurance would go up. There were all these things that would kick in. And I was always amazed the way my body responded to tonics was I would take a tonic, you would give me something, right? And say, here, Gray, try this, see what you think of this. And I remember after a while, I started to identify some key things that were simple things too, like ginseng. That was one of my power herbs where I thought, if I take ginseng, there's a very consistent rhythm with that. And when I wouldn't take tonics for a long time, I would take a tonic. I would, put my ginseng and whatever else I had in there. The first 3 days, I felt like I was on drugs. Like it felt to me, my mind and everything was stimulated, and I actually felt as if I had taken something in that was doing something very positive. And then after 3 days, it would sort of get quiet. And then for about 2 weeks, I would be at that quiet level. And then, like you said, at the 3-week mark, then there was this sort of upswing, and then that would stay if I continued to take the herbs. But it took my body, there was a first initial hit, my body would plateau, and then it would swing back up. And like you said, it was about 3 weeks. 3 weeks was about the time where I started to notice my body is just better equipped in handling, what I'm doing and how I'm going. And what do you think, Kai, for people that don't have any exposure to tonic herbs and they don't know where to get them, they don't know how to research about it, the average American, the average person who knows nothing about this, what can you tell people to get them oriented in the most basic way possible so they can start dialoguing with tonic herbs and make it available, accessible in understanding and approach?
I mean, if you have a degree of interest and intelligence, you can research a little bit about there's 12 adaptogens that are officially declared adaptogens, something like that, 10 to 15-ish. Yep. And an adaptogen has to pass 3 tests, which is, 1, it has to be non-toxic, and it has no toxicity. Number 2, it needs to have increase the body's response to stress, right? And then, number 3, it should play nice with other herbs. It shouldn't have any contraindications with other major tonic herbs. This doesn't count when you're getting herbs from your acupuncturist, because the tonic herbs all play really well together. It's part of their uniqueness. So if you stay in those top 10 or so adaptogens and you're willing to do some reading, you will very quickly figure out that if you tend to be overstimulated, but your adrenals are tired and you have trouble with sleep, but you also need to perform, you're in the ashwagandha category. If you get short of breath and your kidneys are weak and you tend to be lethargic, you're moving toward rhodiola. And you can just start to look at it. Rhodiola also detoxifies the lungs. Cordyceps, adrenal tonic that also protects the liver. Right. So let's say you drink a lot and you have adrenal fatigue. Cordyceps, great mushroom for you.
Yes.
So it just requires you to look, because, and then the next level of specification, which, Gray, you'll understand, which I find again and again that naturopaths don't understand. And although I love them and respect them, I wish they had more respect for Chinese medicine, because they don't consider temperature.
Nope.
They are giving people these 12 bottles of nutraceuticals that all have a thermal nature, that are either heating or cooling or drying or moistening. Yep. And they're not thinking about that. And that has a major impact on the therapeutic result. That's why some of their patients respond and have massive results, and other patients get worse.
Yes.
So anyway,
it's a great thing. We should chew on that a little more when you're done.
Yeah. So that last part I'd say is just ultimately, though, the answer is, if you have no health problems and you like research, try one at a time. Take it for a month. Take the dosage recommended on the bottle or slightly more. I'm always a slightly more kind of person, because they're trying to stay safe in that dosage, so they're really usually under recommending. Mm-hmm. And then journal and notice the changes in your energy level based on what that herb is supposed to do for you. You'll figure out pretty quickly if that works. Otherwise, spend $300 and get a consultation with someone like Gray or me or someone else who will really ask you about your life and your energy levels, and they'll help you really customize the 2 or 3 tonic herbs you should be taking, so that you have a mini formula.
Correct.
That would be worth the $3,000-$6,000, whatever that costs you to get that kind of support, is usually going to be worth it on the other side.
Agreed, because I'm always amazed. People will spend $2,000 on a TV, and if it comes to $2,000 with working with a functional medicine person or a practitioner to get them dialed in, people usually are freaked out. They're like, "Oh, I couldn't do that." And I think it's just how we sort of approach these things. But I want to touch on that point that you just said about what Kai's talking about, and it really is so important. The thermal nature, or the temperature, the energetic temperature of foods, herbs, activities. There's an idea in Chinese medicine where they stress this idea about yin-yang balance, the thermal temperature. Some foods are more warming in nature. And I always try to clarify, and you can chime in on this too, but that it doesn't mean that your body temperature goes up and gives you a fever if you eat something that's warming, quote unquote. That's not what they're talking about in Chinese medicine, but usually there's a few classifications from what I've heard. And I would love to hear what you think on this, Kai, too. I've heard, one is the physical perception and sensation. So people eat a food and they feel warmer inside, right? Or circulation goes up. And then there is usually a sense of ease. This is if you've eaten an appropriate food, say a food that's the right temperature for you, or an herb that's the right temperature, usually there's a sense of ease and not a sense of stress. Something the body feels like it's been equalized in some way. But this idea of the hot and cold, like Kai said, drying and moistening, or something that will hydrate, that's really important, because like you said, right, there are people who have you've seen the people who are raw foodists who thrive, and then the raw foodists who look sickly, like they're not doing well. They don't look healthy at all. And that's usually because the foods are the wrong temperature for their constitution, for how they're operating, for how they're moving. And that's problematic. That's something that we don't look at, and which is pretty cool about Chinese medicine and Ayurveda. They do that pretty well. The temperature and the idea of, dry and wet. How do you? So I've asked other people who are in the healing field, how do you navigate this terrain? Do you speak in metaphor, how do you translate the Chinese medical theory in a way that's applicable?
Yeah, well, I mean, that one, I just think about, like, if you've ever eaten a habanero pepper.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, what happens? Your nose is running, your eyes are watering, you're sweating. How powerful is that ability to dilate blood flow and moisture movement? Like, holy crap, you are moving moisture, you're dilating. Yeah. That's so powerful.
Yep.
Just like when you eat ice cream and you get a brain freeze headache, because it's contracting your blood flow. That cold contracts. And so just imagine if a surgeon wants to change your body, he's going to cut you open, put in a screen to open something, or he's going to tie something off to close it. And yet food is always doing either opening or closing, either contracting or expanding. So right there, it doesn't require any kind of metaphorical understanding to recognize that temperature has an effect on the body.
Right.
Right? So when you put ice into the body or ice cream or whatever, all of your digestive functions and all along your esophagus, everything's contracting all the way down. And I'm not saying you can't have that, but if your digestion's impaired, that is going to mess you up.
Correct.
So, and then the next thing, I just give another example of, like, ginger and mint.
Yeah.
Both ginger and mint are, and this brings in another layer of the flavor. That's not the temperature. This is the flavor.
Yeah.
So the flavor of ginger and mint is pungent, meaning that it's aromatic. It opens things.
Yes.
You can drink ginger tea and your nose will run. You can drink mint tea because pungent opens, right?
Yep.
But mint is cooling in its thermal nature and ginger is warming. So right there, if you've got heat or fire or inflammation, actually ginger and mint both help reduce inflammation. But in some ways, if you have a cold digestive tract that isn't functioning, ginger is going to be really good.
Yep.
If you've eaten a lot of spicy, greasy food and there's some damp heat in there, mint's going to be better. And so just recognize, if you can just bite into that logical piece, that there's a whole world of function and fun and healing if you were to learn about that stuff or get support with it, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Agreed. And it's one of the coolest pieces, I think, of Chinese medicine. When we used to nerd out on this living together, we would cook these amazing meals and we were applying what we knew to the best of our abilities. And I think that's where Kai and I have had a lot of good conversations around food specifically. But for instance, when the salad I've made for us, the Earth Tonic salad, which is in Chinese medicine, salad is seen as a cold, energetically cold food and can stagnate the spleen, the stomach. It's hard on the earth element in the body. And so it was a no-brainer. I was like, well, let's grate ginger into it. Let's add a bunch of black pepper. Let's do things that are, that course and move the liver. And we would eat that salad, and you can tell right away. You're like, your stomach is actually warm afterwards, from the ginger. And if you're eating it with meat, it goes really well. And it's just knowing how to play with this balance.
Totally.
How to tip the scales.
I think, like, I love the name of your podcast, Lifestyle Medicine. It's like, you can have all the good things in life as well as your health and feel good and energized. And there is a price to pay. And it's just the learning and the skills. Like, I loved you talking to Taylor about cooking and how learning to cook is like such an asset to a human being if they can take the time to do it. Yeah. Because your food is your foundational medicine. Yeah. And if you can make it delicious, if you can modify it to what's going on with you and what's going on with your body, I think it's awesome, man. So yeah, I love it. It's fun.
It is fun. It's like one of the best parts for me because it's exploratory. So, Kai, what do you think with all of these things that you're doing? You're working with entrepreneurs. You are educating people on adaptogens, so getting them to adapt and to handle stress better. As you're doing this and moving Chinese medicine knowledge into what I would call the modern American culture and helping people in that way, how do you find the balance between, because I know at your heart, just from us getting into conversations, how you're so devoutly aligned with the tenets of Chinese medicine, the philosophy, the actual approach to the medicine. How do you juggle, I guess, staying true to the classical roots for yourself, but also modernizing it and making it accessible to people without, I guess, sacrificing both? Because I'm always, part of me, I feel like sometimes I need to hang out with scholarly Chinese medicine people just so I can talk on that and keep my brain in that mode. But then I also get a little tired of that and say, actually, I need to talk about it in simpler terms and just get it out to people and expose it to them. How do you juggle that? Because I asked that question to a lot of Chinese medicine practitioners. How do you stay true to the medicine for yourself and contribute to society at the same time?
Yeah, that's such a good question. Well, the first sort of thing that comes to mind is a story. Is like my first business was called Nourishing Life, and there is a Chinese concept called yang sheng, nourishing life. There's also yang shen, nourishing your consciousness. There's also yang ming, nourishing your destiny. Mm-hmm. So at the foundation of Chinese medicine, at its deepest spiritual roots, I believe, and I believe this is historically established, Chinese medicine is not to cure your tennis elbow or get your diarrhea to go away. Its higher goal is to bring people in alignment with their highest destiny, just like feng shui is, just like face reading is, just like Tai Chi is. It's about maximizing the destiny and potential of a human being. Okay, so if we go from that perspective and then we drop into yang sheng, which is this period of time in Chinese medicine history where Chinese medicine was moving from oral tradition, shamanic, teacher to apprentice kind of transmission, mystical, intuitive, but also there was a body of taught knowledge, and it was becoming academic. It was becoming regulated. Yeah. And so there was a blend of mystical and academic at that time. And these practitioners were getting so pedantic, so academic that one of the like OG mystics came in who was also equally smart, and he said, look, I love you guys, I respect you, but if you can't explain your concepts to an 8-year-old or a grandmother, you've lost the Tao in your medicine.
Yeah. Great. That's a great statement.
So no matter how deep you dive into the blood staunching medicinals of the Shanghan Lun or the Pi Wei versus the fire school, like you're getting into ego. Like, don't hurt your patients, and just make sure that knowledge is not for knowledge alone, but it actually has therapeutic impact. And so I took that deeply to heart. And so I would say that when you go back into the classical academic Chinese medicine, keep asking yourself the question, how will this serve my patients and myself? That you will start to select the useful components of it. So that's one way that I balance it. Yeah. On a practical level, I have my patients who don't care about classical Chinese medicine, but I will consult with people that are elders about my client studies. And when I consult with them, they're speaking to me in Chinese medicine terms, and I'm back in it. But then I'm creating a formula or a breath work or a qigong technique that will support this entrepreneur. They don't have to know anything about those mystical mechanics back there.
Yes.
So that's one way. The other answer is I'm working really hard to free myself up and have products and courses that are require less of my time, so that I can go back to study with Jeffrey Yuan, that I can go back to Yang Laoshi, so that I can do my next level of increasing my understanding.
Yes.
So the other answer is I'm not balancing it very well, because I really want to go back.
It's hard. You know? I mean, it's hard, man. It's difficult to continue to self-educate and continuing education with teachers and masters, and also give to the general public in a way that's relevant. That's not just making them zone out where they say, I don't want to hear this, right? I can't follow the philosophy or the ideas. So there's definitely a hurdle there. But again, what I found is it's definitely fun. For me, it becomes almost like a game. How can I take the esoteric and make it digestible and accessible without them even really knowing necessarily what they're getting? Putting it in digestible terms, I think, is really, it's important for sure.
I think one of the things that I love about you the most is that you value beauty and metaphor and art.
Yeah.
And you also value practicality and functionality.
I do.
Yeah, and so I love that, because for me, Chinese medicine is beautiful, but it's beautiful because it works.
Yeah.
But there's like a poetry, and like if I just like to cap off this part of adaptogens as we maybe move into something else. Is just like, I don't know if you remember the quote I sent you about how, like, on the metaphorical level, on the doctrine of the signatures level, there's this teaching that goes into Greek medicine, Chinese medicine, Middle Eastern medicine, shamanic medicine, that plants develop their adaptive capacity to survive in nature through drought, through heat, through floods. And those most valuable plants that which bears themselves out in their pharmaceutical testing are ones that have endured great hardship.
Yeah.
And it's in their plant's ability to adapt and survive that the phytochemicals and the alkaloids and all the other active chemical constituents are produced at higher levels.
Yeah. And
so literally these plants are lending us their knowledge and their wisdom of how to survive.
That's it.
And it's a spiritual transmission. It's a wisdom in them. Young plants won't have it. And so in the same way that metaphor from shamanic herbalism is now true in modern chemistry, there's so many places we can look for that metaphor in our life. You know, like we can talk about hormesis, like the fact that when we undergo hardship, physically, cold showers, fasting, it turns on the body's evolutionary capacity.
Yep.
So we could have learned this from Chinese herbalism if we were looking there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, I think we got to stay with the beauty, and you do a great job of helping people fall in love with the metaphor and the poetry and the art.
Yeah, I try, man, like, because I think that's what's kept me in it. I think this Chinese medicine as a system is just fucking elegant, and you know it. I've seen it, and there's so many things I don't know about it. Right? It's a universe in and of itself. There's only so much. The Chinese say you need multiple lifetimes to master all of Chinese medicine, and I believe them. It takes a long time to get everything in order, but those pieces have spoken to me. The art, the elegance, and the simplicity. A lot of it is, there's a lot of simplicity in Chinese medicine that is pretty straightforward and directive that I really like. And I think that's the piece that I thought, well, it's probably doable to make it digestible for Americans. It's worth a shot at least, because that practicality is in there. Well, Kai, let's talk about this. I definitely want to talk to you about Tai Chi, because you had mentioned Yang Lao-Shi and going back to study with him. But talk to me about what you've seen, I guess, in your own practice with Tai Chi, how it's helped you, what's good about it, what do you struggle with? I would love to just hear your stuff on Tai Chi, because you and I both share this, and I need to give Kai a shout out here. The Tai Chi form that I teach from Yang Lao-Shi, I'm only teaching it because Kai took me to China, translated for me as I asked way too many questions because I didn't speak the language. I'm like, Kai, what did he say? Say it better. No, I know that's not what he said. Say it again. But Kai translated for me and took me there, and I was able to establish and learn because of you. So, many thanks, man, because I've got this summer is 4 years with my Tai Chi students who have been studying the short form, and some of them are getting 4 years. Like, they've been sitting with this form and they're starting to get really good.
Dude,
it's cool.
I'm telling you, we should do a long form intensive. Like, we should have, because, so here's the thing with Tai Chi, it's a frame. It's a framework. And I'm going to give a shout out to one of my current mentors who I just absolutely love and respect is Dr. Roger Yanka. He's over 70 years old. He has the Institute for Integral Tai Chi and Qigong. And one of the things that I had learned from Yang Lao-Shi that Dr. Yanka put even clearer words to is Tai Chi, which is actually Tai Chi, refers to a symbol which we call the yin yang symbol.
Yeah.
That's not called yin yang. That's called the Tai Chi too. The great ultimate picture. And it represents duality. It represents the complementary nature of duality. And so Tai Chi is a martial art based on a philosophy.
Yeah.
And when you separate that, you lose so much value. So in And the style of Tai Chi that Gray and I practice, when one hand goes up, the other hand goes down. The high hand, the yang hand, is on the side of the body that's rooted, or yin, and that has more weight in it. And there are all these balance-based principles that are programmed into the form, and they have a function of balancing the flow of blood and functional energy in the body.
Yep.
They have an impact of balancing the left and right hemisphere of the brain. They have an impact of balancing the heart's electromagnetic function of beating in a slower, more comfortable way. They balance the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. All of this is intrinsic in Tai Chi because it's based on the fact that the complementary opposites in our world. Okay, so what the fuck does all that mean, right? What am I saying?
What I'm saying is
that if you don't sleep, eventually you will pay the price in your performance during the day. Yep. If you have sex too much, there is a law of diminishing returns. You will eventually not even want to have sex, and on very least, you'll feel tired and depleted.
Right.
Some of your neurotransmitters, compassion, will be depleted. So it is this deep philosophy for bringing peace and balance to a human being by understanding that we are in a world of duality.
Yep.
And it is so incredible. And I'll say the last part is that if you, and this is a new revelation that I've had, Grant, and I'm not sure if I shared with you.
I don't know. Yeah.
Is that,
lay it on me.
So, I used to think Tai Chi was only for certain people. And I've realized more recently, and this is a spot that Gray and I have slightly different approaches, that for me to function, I need a little bit of the hard aspect of martial arts to run Fa Jing, to run fast movements, to get a little bit out of breath and then slow down, which is why I've gravitated also toward Chen style, which in its base form has about 20% of the movements being fast emission of force and then goes right back to slow.
Yep.
What is that type of martial art teaching us? It's one of the few things in the world that teaches you to run the hormones of get shit done and the hormones of relaxation parallel.
Yeah.
And if you're listening to this and you want greater performance in your life, you want more longevity in your life, you want a healthier relationship, you are asking to be able to run the masculine stimulating neurotransmitters and neurohormones along with the relaxation, healing, relaxed awareness hormones.
Yep.
And nothing teaches that better than either hard martial arts with a good dose of soft or soft martial arts with a decent dose of hard.
Yeah.
If you run that, you will function better under stress. You will react better to what's coming at you in life. And you don't even have to think about it. Just train diligently. Go to your class, do what your teacher tells you, and you will get those benefits even if you're not thinking about it.
Oh, yeah.
So that's where I've come to, that actually I believe most people would be massively enhanced by studying a type of Tai Chi that has embedded in it the philosophy and the practice, of
the
hard
pieces,
and soft.
The pieces integrated. I agree. And I have... There's a few different directions things I'd like to say here. The Tai Chi I thought about as a martial art. It was definitely used for fighting in olden times in China. Definitely has strong ties to health cultivation. And one of the things I've always sat with in studying Tai Chi, especially in the past few years and teaching it so consistently, and I see the change in my students and how they think and operate and their mood shift and their bodies getting stronger and more coordinated. The thing that's stuck with me also, there are a lot of students in my class, most, right, who aren't particularly interested in the martial aspect. We still talk about it. I still show it. I still show joint locks. I still show strikes. How to push, saying this is what you're doing. There's a functional mechanism that's happening with your body in this gesture. And so what I've seen, though, is that people, regardless if they're going to use this in a self-defense capacity, the onslaught of life, just so much of life is, I don't want to think of it always as a battle, but there's so much that we are, environmental toxins could be seen as an opponent, right? Or an enemy. These these larger toxic people that are just emotionally draining to us could be seen as an opponent in a sense. The wrong foods can be an opponent. There's all these things that can come at us. And I think what's cool about it is that outside of the physical self-defense fighting piece, there's something very real about Tai Chi making you more martially oriented in your outlook to all stressors. Every stressor in your life can be seen as an opponent. And I feel like Tai Chi makes you more aware of that. How to, move a little softer, say your words a little softer, soften them a bit. They don't need to be as penetrating or as harsh. All of these things start to shift and happen with the practice of Tai Chi. And that's one of the coolest things. I think I've told you this. My mom has been studying with me since I started my class. So she's coming up on 4 years, as is my stepdad, Bob. And they are, when I've asked my mom, she's turning 70 on your birthday. You guys share the same birthday coming up here. And I asked my mom, I said, Mom, what have you picked up from Tai Chi? It's been 4 years. And the first time I asked her, she almost teared up. Her eyes sort of got full of tears. And she said, Gray, the thing that's different is she said, it's here and here, and for people that aren't looking, I'm pointing at my heart and my head. She said, this connection between these two things is better. She said, I respond better to people and life situations. And my understanding of how I look at the world, political things that used to really stress me out. She said, I don't respond nearly as harsh as I used to. And I'm more at ease. I'm more adaptable. And I thought, God, that's at the crux of what Tai Chi is in its movement, right? Don't force, don't push, be receptive, listen through contact, force, all of these things. And I completely agree with you, man, to touch on that point of the hard and soft. I think when I first met you, I can't remember where I was in my development when I met you, but I remember years back, I was not sure if martial application was absolutely necessary in studying these arts. And then sometimes I thought, yes, that's all that's really important. I've kind of vacillated between those extremes. And now with Tai Chi, I do a lot of muscle testing. I do a lot of, when we're holding a posture, I come by and I press on people and say, is your body structurally sound, right? Could this posture actually hold some kind of physical strength and not just an empty floating, frame of just nothing on inside? Because I think that's the piece you're talking about, right? That element of hardness is real. It's as soft as Tai Chi is, the element of that hard piece cannot be ignored. And if it is, I think the art suffers big time.
Well, I think there's a couple of distinctions I want to bring in and kind of just illuminate what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So I remember teaching my sister Jill, and she had this one move that she just couldn't get right, and it was a push. And I said, Jill, I want you to imagine that our father is in front of oncoming traffic, and he's 200 pounds. You know that. How would you do this move if you knew you were pushing him out of traffic? Instantly, she did the move correctly.
Right.
I brought in emotionality. Mm-hmm. Now, something that you primed me for that I also understand now is that, and this is going to go into something that Yang Lasha teaches all the time, that hopefully it'll drop in again on you, Gray. It's like, you've showed me many times that the highest level of martial arts is about internal connections. Mm-hmm. And so if someone's in a posture and you press on their upper hand and it's not rooted to their back heel, the hand collapses, because you're only using the muscles of the arm.
Correct.
Or the same thing if you push, like you were demonstrating one of your videos on Facebook there. If you push with just your triceps, that's not even close to pushing with your whole upper torso, which is not even close to pushing and sinking and getting into earth energy.
Right.
So by using different types of testing to show them whether or not they have internal connections, you are helping them find a deeper level of interconnection in their body. Okay, now let me go poetic for a second.
Yeah, please do.
Okay, so the teaching in the Tao and from Yang Laoshe is that the fundamental alchemy of life is fire and water. Mm-hmm. Okay, let's say you don't have any idea what that means. The earth was a ball of rock and ice with no life on it. And it got caught in a orbit of the sun. And the warmth of the sun, as Earth got drawn into its magnetic orbit, it started to slowly, over a long period of time, warm up until the point where the Earth's moisture became water and steam, and that steam became the atmosphere. Now, this is slightly simplistic because somewhere in that concept, there's a magnetic field that came about.
Yeah.
So there had to be a magnetic field. Now, whether that came from the core of the Earth, whether it's a hollow core or a magma core, whatever, we can talk about that. But regardless, there is no life in a planet of ice.
Correct.
And there is no life in fire. Life occurs when there's a balance of moisture and warmth.
Yeah.
And the very atmosphere that we breathe is fundamentally fire infused into water. Gray, are you with me? Are you following this?
Yes.
Okay. So chi that we breathe on a basic earth science level is the marriage of the sun's warmth into water, which creates steam.
Yes.
We die in the desert with no water and too much sun. We die on the North Pole with no heat to move our blood. So this is just truth. This is basic truth. Now, in the metaphor, in our body, our spirit is the fire. Our consciousness is the fire.
Yes.
And sickness and deterioration of the body happens when the body's innate intelligence breaks down, or consciousness. And death is when the body, when the spirit or the conscious leaves the body, there's no organizing principle, the body deteriorates back into the earth. Mm-hmm. Right? Definition of death in Chinese medicine, separation of yin and yang.
Right.
Spirit leaves body, body deteriorates. Okay, so here's what Yang Laoshi said all the time.
And to give Yang Laoshi to everyone listening is our teacher in China.
Yeah.
So
Teacher Yang.
Teacher Yang.
This is what he would always say. He'd say, the health and longevity is based on the integration of the mind into the body. Because the more deeply you penetrate your consciousness into every cell of your body, the more intelligent your body becomes. Mm-hmm. Doesn't that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
I mean, it's mindfulness.
Yes.
It's Eckhart Tolle saying to scan your body with no judgment and to do that. But on a metaphysical level, which I believe is real, the more our mind can be evenly dispersed into every cell of our body, the more we're able to push a person larger than ourselves. Mm-hmm. The more, the less chance of any kind of pathogen invading, the less chance of us owning someone else's emotional projection, because we so deeply inhabit ourselves.
Yes.
And so I believe that high level martial skill requires the mind to be so deeply in every part of the body to create that internal connection that the side effect is health, emotional resilience, presence, increased immunity.
Yeah.
That is a byproduct of mind-body integration.
Yes. Well said, amigo.
Yeah.
I'm on board. I mean, Tai Chi, that's the thing. I think when people practice Tai Chi, I think, and we've talked about this before, qigong can be fundamentally simpler in its approach. Tai Chi is fundamentally more complex. There's more moves. There's more gestures. There's more things happening with your body that you have to track. But the payoff in the end is this repetition of the same gestures, that you pick up a sequence, you pick up the movements, and they do have an innate intelligence built into them. So much of what's happened over the course of the last 4 years as I've trained it is me seeing, as I study it, people will ask me a question about the form of a section, and if I don't have any frame of reference to it, I usually end up, that becomes my practice. I go and practice that portion of the form, and I sit with it for sometimes a week or two until I start to get, until the answer matriculates. And I'm always amazed at how the answer sort of comes from just practicing the form. So it has something built into it. You're absolutely right. And I think that's the piece that's beautiful about things like yoga too. Mind-body integration, that we're trying to put our awareness, our intent, our focus into the body so that it's more resilient across the board. If we have that, it makes life easier. That's for sure.
And I totally agree. And the other piece is like when we are caught up in our addictions and our distractions, when we have unresolved emotional issues that are in the tissues, which most of us do, and biology belief, the body keeps the score. There's a myriad of research understanding how our emotional issues and traumas and wounds get stored and programmed into the body. The person who starts Tai Chi will come in contact with that right away.
Yeah.
Because as you're asked to slow down, and as you're asked to breathe, and as you're asked to relax, what you're going to notice is what's in the way of your body coming into this ideal form and shape and interconnectivity are all of your patterns of distraction, pain, and trauma that are stored. And so even though, Ron Teagarden says it this way, it's probably a Taoist saying, he says, when you dig a well, the first few buckets come up muddy.
Yeah.
So when you're about to go into a mind-body practice, you might want to create an expectation that you may not enjoy it the first couple of weeks. And the payoff for the person who enjoys it less is even bigger than for the person who comes in and just loves it, because it's likely that person that feels resistance, that has discomfort come up, that you actually have more to heal and more benefit to gain from it. So it's just an ironic. And so the Chinese would say, enjoy your medicine, which is to say, 吃苦, eat bitter.
Eat bitter.
Eat bitter.
Oh my God, like, eat bitter.
When you do horse stance and your mind really wants to go somewhere else, that's the medicine right there. So anyway, I'm not trying to scare people away from Tai Chi. I'm just saying that the things that don't feel good are often where your next breakthrough comes from, interestingly. And sadly, I'm a pleasure-seeking person. And but I have to admit that a lot of times if there's discomfort there's probably a gift on the other side of it.
Oh, yeah. And I think you have to balance those two forces, I feel like, to maintain any level of sanity and health, is that you've got to... Oh man, you have to bump elbows with the ugly demons that you don't want to touch. And at the same time, as you talked about, I've heard you talk about pleasure stacking, where you also have to really indulge and enjoy yourself when those times come, because when they're really actually there, they're not phenomenally common either. I don't feel like, I can tell you when I have an amazingly pleasurable experience with friends and something, and I'm like, wow, that was a special, magical moment, but it doesn't happen all the time either. You can have lots of this, like, oh yeah, that was a good little hangout, that was this and that. And then you can have those really dark, horrible things that we don't, like you said, don't want to touch. But boy, having both I think is really important. But I agree, man, heroes they're not born, they're made. They have to go through really horrid shit most of the time to get to a place where they've got medicine that they can deliver back.
Right, just like the plants, right?
Yes.
And just like most of our heroes today, the real ones, not just the story ones from Marvel, but the real ones like Tony Robbins, like Brene Brown, they came from a difficult path, and that's what made them so open and so skilled is figuring out how to navigate that process. Great. It reminds me, there's a new book out on psychedelics. I think it's Michael Pollan. He wrote The Omnivore's Dilemma. Is that right? Am I saying his name right?
Yes, Michael Pollan.
Yeah. I listened to his podcast because this book is considered the first time a book's been written by a journalist for the modern public.
Yep.
And one thing he said, I'll share two pieces that really landed for me. He said, for one thing, psychology has artificially divided anxiety, depression, into these separate categories, right? Reduction.
Right.
When in reality, they're the same. They're symptoms of the same innate existential crisis. And he said it's really crazy to think that in psychology we totally accept that one traumatic experience can create a myriad of problems in someone's life.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Oh yeah.
He said basically what the research is showing us through psychedelics is that psychedelics are the counterpose. They are an experience where, if structured with the right setting and container, can be so deeply positive that it actually undoes all of the previous stuff that happened to us. So this is it. This is such a cool concept that we can have one so powerfully pleasurable, insightful, joyful experience that it can actually fix or heal or undo a lifetime of trauma in a very brief amount of time.
Yeah. And it makes me think about, and it's not just healing. Well, it is. It's one and the same, but I feel like it also gives you access. Like you said, if the trauma is a gift, if there's a gift in there, I think sometimes we just can't, for whatever reason, we just can't access the gem from that experience. And I feel like psychedelics, they give you access sometimes where you're able to frame it. I think I told you back in right at the beginning of 2018, the tail end of 2017, I sat with my first ayahuasca ceremony, and I went in to that ceremony strictly to process Teal, my daughter, being in the hospital for a month. And that was the impetus and the drive behind why I was going in, because that experience was without question the hardest thing I've ever had to do. And I remember going in and thinking, I want to deal with this. That's part of why I'm here. And then going into that space, I was amazed at how simple the message was once I was inside and was confronted with that. Now, mind you, I cried a lot because I was processing a lot of horrible things that I had gone through. But really what it, in a nutshell, and it was more emotional than a mental thinking process, but it's sort of like I was shown the scenario of my daughter being in the hospital. And it was a real simple message. We all struggle somewhere in life. Some people do it really early. Some people do it in the middle. Some people do it at the end. And some people don't do it at all, and they're not any better for it. So struggle can hit you at any time in life, and it doesn't really matter. And the message I got was, this is when the struggle came for her. This was her first major hurdle. It is what it is. And be grateful that she's more resilient it's like a plant, a fledgling little baby being challenged right out of the gates early on. And that simplicity in that answer was pretty amazing. I thought, that's exactly right. It's just a stress early on. That's just where she got it, But I couldn't get there. I mean, I wouldn't have gotten there. I wouldn't have been able to get to that place without the guidance, without that opening, and without that medicine giving me access to the trauma. But then I was better for it. In the end, when I look back, I'm like, I'm glad I went through it. It opened up a whole new can of struggles, but it made me better. Yeah. Made me a better husband, better father. That's for sure. Count your blessings.
Yeah. I mean, it reminds me of a philosopher who was analyzing Chinese culture. He once said that all of Chinese religion and philosophy has at its core a certain state of consciousness that, in his opinion, is its most valuable contribution to the world.
Yeah.
And that consciousness is called relaxed vigilance.
Ooh, I like that. That's way better than relaxed awareness.
Yeah, relaxed vigilance. And what I realized, I just had an experience recently where I was under the influence of psychedelics, and I was stricken with grief and missing of my mother and my brother who passed away. And I literally just looked up, and instead of numbing or escaping or anything, I just sat with that for a second, and immediately it was like forgiveness.
Wow.
And I was like, oh. And so then I just brought my brother into my mind, and I was like, wait, is it me that needs to forgive him, or him that needs to forgive me, or what is it? And then I was like, I just went literally like, oh, I love you so much, Todd. I forgive you. Please forgive me. Please forgive me. Like Ho'oponopono, right? Like I just ran, and I could feel him coming closer to me.
Yeah.
Because now all the memories of him aren't being pushed away because of some blame or judgment or guilt on my part. And then once I had done that and I felt him really close to me, I just brought my mother in. And I did the same thing. I said, Mom, these are all the things I was angry at you about, and it doesn't matter anymore, and I love you, and I miss you. I miss all these things about you. Please forgive me. And bam, I felt her spirit closer to me. And what does that mean? I felt my memories of her more present and positive rather than pushed away and anchored to the negative.
Yes.
And that happened in probably 10 minutes, in a psychedelic experience that I just stepped away and did my own thing. Now, I can feel that that's a change that sticks with me.
Yes.
And I believe that what you learn in Tai Chi is that same relaxed vigilance, because what I've noticed with most psychedelics is that there is a lightness and a groundedness at the same time.
Yep.
I can pop Tai Chi postures and hold them and land in a one-footed stance and just be in it and be like, oh.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh my God, I'm so stable. I'm so light right now.
Yeah.
But I'm so grounded right now. Yep. I'm so relaxed right now. It's relaxed vigilance. Mm-hmm. So I think that's probably that's a big medicine for our culture. And because you can't do psychedelics all the time, I think that's where meditation, qigong, breath work, Tai Chi, they are so pivotal to be able to sustain this with a practice.
Yes. Right. And it's like a slow drip where you can get an altered state, quote unquote, but not necessarily be into the full dipped shamanic realm where you're processing sometimes your ancestry and the rough trials and tribulations of people who have left us. Well, you hit on a really interesting point just now as you were looping it back to the Tai Chi thread, which was when we were living together, you and I have shared about traumas from our parents, right? Things that like our parents maybe did or the way they certain, no one gets out perfect. But one of the things I had talked about when my dad was still alive was he was hard on me for my weight when I was younger. And I had said to you, I told you this story of, I don't know, it was a story that always was sort of, I was bitter about, and it always really like hurt my feelings. And I remember telling you, and it was, I think I was in Great America, and he allowed either my friend to get an ice cream cone and not me because he was thinner, and at the time I was like, you dirty bastard, first of all, because like I'm a kid and I want ice cream and why can't I have ice cream? And I was really upset about it for years. Like, he's judging me. He's, doesn't accept me for just how I am. And I remember telling you that story, and you just, with no context to my trauma, you said he was looking out for you. And you made it so blunt and easy to understand. You're like, he's watching out for you. He didn't want you to get diabetes. He saw you were just running down the fat kid path and was, was trying to stop you. And I remember you saying that, and I'm like, no, Kai. He was, no, he was, hurting my feelings. And you're like, no, he was helping you out. And I remember thinking that it was one of the few times I was able to give context to a negative experience and saw it as something positive, like you were saying with your mom. And I think we can look at those things, and sometimes it doesn't require psychedelic. Sometimes it just requires a good friend who doesn't have context and can be listening and present and say the right thing at the right time. But but it's very true. I think if we can get to that place, we're better off for it. Let me ask you this, Kai, and this kind of connects, I guess, to psychedelics and all these topics intermesh, but the power of ritual. You and I have both gotten into conversations about ritual. The context for ritual can be different for every person and depending on what you're ritualizing. But where do you think ritual fits into all of this? Because, I have a pretty personal ritual that I do that you know about. That's my most consistent one, but you talk about daily rituals, and so do I. But I want to hear your thoughts on ritual and how that fits into all these goodies here.
I want to touch on one more thing, and if we come back to it, we can, and then I'll go right into ritual, which is just that Dr. Yanka, as he traveled around China and met these Taoist masters, which are called immortals. An immortal is not someone necessarily that lives forever, although we could talk about whether they've ever existed or not. But what an immortal is like in these Taoist communities and mountain towns, they have an elder who's the oldest, happiest, healthiest person in the village, and they're considered the immortal. And as Dr. Yanka went from town to town, and of course he and his tour group would seek these people out to have audience with them, he realized that they all had one thing in common, which was that you couldn't convince them that there was a problem.
Oh, wow.
Someone's got diarrhea and we need a translator. And like these people with all these foreigners coming into their house, coming to their garden, coming to their yard, they never got upset. They never freaked out. They never worried about the language barrier. And it was across the board.
Wow.
And that really hit me because Yang Laoshi, there's never a problem with him.
Yeah, he's pretty mellow.
Someone wants their money back for tuition. Okay, let's talk about that. Someone's complaining about that. He never gets upset about stuff.
Wow.
And then the story of the horse keeper?
I don't know.
The story of this Taoist story of this man who lives on the outskirts of town. He has a very beautiful, handsome son, and he has these horses. And, the women from the town are gossiping and come over and say, you're so lucky. You have this great son. You have all these horses. And then the next week, the horses run away. And the people in town are like, oh, poor horse keeper. All his horses ran away. That's so sad. They're all going through this drama. Mm-hmm. And so next thing you know, a couple weeks go by and the horses that ran away come back and these wild stallions have followed them back. And now he has twice as many horses.
Yeah.
And everyone's like, you're so lucky. You're so lucky. And the horse keeper says, we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah.
And then the son is working with the horses trying to break the wild stallions, and he breaks his leg. And all the gossiping people say, oh, poor horsekeeper. And the horsekeeper says, we'll see. And then the town goes to war, and all of the young men are conscripted into the army, and the son can't go.
Because he's got a broken leg.
He's got a broken leg. And the horsekeeper says, we'll see.
Yeah.
But that Taoist story, which never made sense to me, now makes sense to me that he's just trusting the Tao.
Yeah.
And I say that to say this. What I see in you and myself as we get older is that when challenges come up, I'm less likely to go into some self-judgmental story or some suffering story. And I'm more likely to say, I've gotten through everything else in my life, and almost always the pain and the challenge has become a gift.
Yeah.
So can I accept the gift right now and leave some of the pain and challenge away? And I think that's one to cook with. To sit with.
Yeah. Have you listened to the 9th episode of this podcast with Larissa Conte? The whole thing was on grief rituals but rituals in general. And it was around this, what you just said. I mean, that's a huge thread to that. And I think we have this weird relationship with pain, where pain has somehow, if we experience pain, there's a badness to it. It's somehow a bad thing. People, I don't want to feel that. Mm-hmm. I don't want to cry. I don't want to let in the grief about my mom. I don't want to let in the grief about, and this thread that you're talking about just now, what Larissa has stressed to me, she says that, for one, you can't avoid it, and to avoid it is going to rob you of life.
So let me put. There's a wisdom teaching that's been dropped on me.
Yeah.
I'm still sitting with it, and I'd like to say it to you, and you tell me what it means.
Yeah.
Okay. Suffering is optional. Pain is not.
Suffering. Oh man.
Is
suffering optional.
Pain is not. Pain is not optional. Suffering is optional.
So to me, that immediately makes me think pain like a stimulus. If you get burned, it's gonna hurt. If a hot wrought iron burns you, pain, you can't get away. It's going to physically hurt. But the suffering after the fact, the suffering is sort of I would say the past tense. It means that the stimulus you can't change. A bad thing can happen, or a painful thing is going to happen. But the suffering seems like the long-term relationship to that experience, more or less.
Right. And so our parents are going to die. Childbirth is painful and risky. Relationships are going to dissolve. There is pain in life.
Yes.
The optional part is how we categorize it and file. And that's where we create our own suffering.
Mm-hmm.
So let me transition that into ritual.
Yeah.
So the most powerful ritual that got me really interested in studying ritual formally, that one of the experiences that I've had that I teach in my programs, is I was in Taiwan, and I'd buried my mother and brother, and I know what those funerals were like. And my qigong teacher at the time, Lo Haiyang Marcus, this amazing white crane teacher that I would love to go back and train with. If I had nothing else to do in life, I would go train with him. He would come down to a little mountain town I lived in because his parents were from there. He was in Taipei. And anyway, he calls me on the weekend that we normally have class, and he says, Kai, my father died.
Mm.
And I said, oh, well, just let me know when you come up for air, and we'll start training again later. He goes, no. I'm coming this weekend for the funeral, and we're going to train every morning, and then I'm going to go to the funeral after. And I'm like, oh, teacher, you don't have to do that for me. He's like, no, there's nothing I'd rather do than pass on my gift and lineage, and not like giving me his lineage, but pass on his work, and then go. That'll be the best way for me to prepare anyway. So we go there the first day, and we get done, and he says, you're coming with me to the funeral. Whoa. And I'm like, oh, okay. I've never seen a Taoist funeral. I want to see this. Yeah. So day one, we go to the funeral, and there are these professional wailers, these beautiful young women who have like a red bandana and they're wearing like white Jedi looking robes. And every time the family, everyone's wearing dark colors. Every time the family, there's nobody crying in a way that it's audible, the wailers start crying.
Wow.
And then what do you think happens to the family? They get entrained, they start crying.
They start crying.
It goes in a wave. That crying dies down. There may be like 10 minutes of silence. The wailers start crying again.
Oh, like they're facilitating the crying process.
They are. Literally, the people are we're in a U shape. The altar to the dead father's up front, and the wailers are on a carpet in the middle.
Wow.
And they dance, they thrash, and they thrive, and they
wow.
It's powerful.
Wow.
And so there I am, a guy I don't even know, and I'm bawling.
Yeah.
I'm bawling, man. I'm getting teared up now. So next day, hey, we're going to train qigong again in the morning tomorrow, and we're going to go to day 2 of the funeral. And I'm like, oh, shit, I don't know if I can handle another day of that. I'm going to make an excuse or something.
I think I'm tapped out, homie.
So we get there that day. It's in a different place, and it is a complete celebration, like an Irish wake. Everyone is wearing fancy clothes. They're playing music. We're eating his favorite foods. People are drinking, telling stories of his father. Yeah. It's a freaking party, dude.
Yeah.
I had so much fun. Got a little libations in me.
Yeah.
Some chinkujio, this like kind of like a stronger a sake that Taiwanese make. It's not like baijiu in China, like vodka, and it's not as weak as sake. It's it's like right in the middle of the two. It's really pleasant liquor in China. So I had a great day. I had so much fun. I got to know everybody. It was great. Okay, there's a third day to the funeral. Third day.
Oh, man.
Everyone's in white. And there are Taoist priests there. And they are chanting and reading text to pave the road to heaven for the Father. To God, and everyone's meditative. No talking.
Wow.
And so there's this funeral where they cried, they celebrated, and then they guided him on his journey. And I realized in my heart, you guys can make your own meaning around this, that I believe if every funeral was like that, there would be way less emotional grief to carry for years to come. I mean, it's basically NLP, the grief process. Feel fully the grief of letting go, celebrate the life and the joy, and then get into that meditative space to like, what lessons are you taking away from this, and the certainty that he's in a better place.
Yeah.
That made me realize that in America, we need new rituals.
Oh, I agree.
Yeah. So anyway, in short, for me, rituals are a technology. They're a reliable set of behaviors, emotional states, thought states, body postures that reliably produce a result. So they're just a technology. It's not religious necessarily.
Yeah, I would agree. Alex Kugler, who we know, Alex, big shout out. What's up, buddy? He talks about prayer, he says prayer technology, sharing this prayer technology with people. And I think when you look at the lens, what we talked about earlier, Chinese medicine says certain organs in the body digest emotion, and that's a system. And just like any system, it can get backed up, bogged down, it can circulate better, it can self-regulate. And I think ritual puts us into that emotional terrain that allows that stuff to start to happen. But I think it's a concept people don't think about. To think about the well-structured flow of your emotional stuff in your body and in your mind and in your spirit, thinking of that as a technology is something that is foreign to most people. We think of tech, right? We think of the microphone or my HD camera here as technology. But there's the immaterial, the intangible technology, the stuff we can do to better. So I agree with that. And I would say, when you're just talking about that 3-day ritual, I've been to, I'm sure you have too, standard funerals where it's somber the entire time. And there's no joy, there's no laugh, there's no elation. And I have been to celebration of lives where it's mostly celebration and not a lot of what you would call somber or grief. And I feel like the marriage is between the two. When there are moments, it's polarity, what we're talking about, how we keep fire and water balanced. the laughter of fire and the crying of tears, the water. I think those two things, my favorite thing when I do my ritual, and if you guys that follow me on social media, I post a picture once a year of, my ritual I do for my dad. And I look forward to that ritual strictly for that reason. I know when I'm out there, I'm going to laugh. And I know when I'm out there, I'm going to cry. And I go into that, and I do, because I talk to him, just the way you said with your, you had your psychedelic experience recently, and you talked to you brought your mom into your mind and your brother, and you felt like they were getting closer to you. I mean, that portal is open every time I sit out there and do that on April 27th. I drink that whiskey, and then I bring him in my mind, and I start asking questions, and I hear a voice back. I mean, I think it's mine, but it always sounds like his too. And that's a conversation, and there's always funny stuff that comes out of it. And I think even in his celebration of life, I got to laugh and cry, and people did in the crowd as well. And people still talk about it to this day. 700 people laughing and crying and doing cheers and telling stories. And I mean, it was awesome. But I think, like, you're right. I think, boy, I would have a very different path and relationship to that if that hadn't taken place, if there weren't laughter and tears. If it had just been tears, I wouldn't have been the same. And if it had just been celebration, I don't think it would have been the same. But these things have weight. I mean, I know you and I both are on the same page there.
Yeah. I mean, it's like the first time that I got to participate in that ritual with you on the front porch of the treehouse, like it was such an honor. I didn't go to any of my classes that day.
Yeah, I remember.
Because I wanted, but it wasn't that I felt sorry for you.
Yeah.
I felt the music and the maker's mark. It was just like I wanted to be there with you.
Yeah.
I wanted to hear stories of your father, you know?
Yeah.
So it's beautiful. And Gray, the other thing, I think there's a lot of value in telling other people what we love about them and what we see in them.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I most admire about you is that you have this understanding and this way of seeing the world where so on some level, and you can unpack this for all of us in a second if you want, that on some level that your character of how you show up on a day-to-day basis is built by your habits.
Yeah.
And your habits are your choice to either abide by or not. And so what I saw in you that is very different than how I operate is that you go back to the most granular, simple step that if you put one foot in front of the other, that will become a habit, which will become an aspect of your character, which will manifest as a quality of being in your life.
Yeah, that's right.
I've seen that in you time over, and at times it's been confusing, at times it's been frustrating, at times it's been all kinds of things, but ultimately I see the efficacy in it.
Yeah. Well, thank you, man.
I see that it works. And so, really you're a master of ritual.
Well, thank you, man. I appreciate that. And I mean, it's been an evolving, long studied process, and I don't think I even knew what I was doing for a long time, but you're right, that is how it has come to pass. So I appreciate you seeing it, because it's something that's really helped me. And you're right. There's a quote. I'll find it for you sometime. But there's a long standing. It's 3 lines, but the last one is habit is the daily battleground of character. And when I heard that, I thought, yeah, that's it. That the habits we do build character. And that quote talks about how we can't expect to make these really profound decisions if in the mundane, quiet moments we've squandered character and choice and those things. We do have to build it slow and steady all the time. And to mirror that, man, the thing that I love about you, what I've seen, I mean, since the beginning, you have maintained a joy and inspiration first of all, for what you study, but your capacity to inspire. I think that there's very few people that I've seen that can actually deliver a message or an idea that people will get genuinely the fire lit under their ass. Like, what's this guy talking about? He's so stoked. That comes off very well, that you're very happy with what you're doing, that you've seen result, but you embody it through joy, right? It's not, there's not a, joy and inspiration seem to be your 2 medicine threads that I'm always most moved by, because it's not just always, right? You can have the hard the hard-ass direct luck martial art teacher who's like, this is your medicine. And you're like, oh, he's such a badass. Oh my God. Like but they're so firm and stern that is the medicine. Yeah. People show it in so many different ways, but those are yours, man. Joy and inspiration. You've got those brimming, and it shows people. I mean, you're able to get a lot of people opened up to these ideas because of that. I think it's a beautiful thread, to be able to touch on. Well, Kai, what else should we talk about, man? Because we've had long conversations about lots of different things. But what else? What do you think?
Well, I mean, as I start to transition out of coaching and supporting entrepreneurs, which I'm writing my book this year. I'm actually going away to write next weekend.
Nice. Do you have a title? Just curious.
I mean, I don't have the working title is like, The Pathway of Power, Ancient Wisdom, and Modern Neuroscience. And I don't know what's under that. Sure, but then the value proposition is like, is it possible to grow your business, have your income and your impact while coming from a place of deep inner nourishment?
Yeah.
The average person wastes 1 to 3 hours a day in distraction, overwhelm, and fatigue. Mm-hmm. And yet there are a group of practices that can put you in energy, clarity, and focus. And they take 5 to 15 minutes once you've learned them and you understand them. Yep. And so I think like so that's basically, as I'm going to head back into preserving the Taoist arts on the planet and to deepening my understanding of all the wisdom holders of Chinese medicine, I'm going to leave that book and a really badass course that's evergreen, that's through Vimify, that's like habit stacking, and it's going to be there for people. If they want to access it, it's going to be there in a really powerful way.
Very cool.
And then I'm going to get to move into some other stuff as people get excited about that and they graduate from that. I want to start teaching qigong and tai chi on the deeper level again. Yep. The neuroscience is going to stay, but I want to get back into the nuances of the physical movement. I want to get back into the combination of psychedelics with meditation and tai chi and qigong. Yeah. Like what happens when 10 people already know a form?
Yeah.
And then we go into a journey and we all do the form for like 90 minutes. Like there's what's possible there is different. That's when the next level of balance on this planet is going to get channeled through those people.
Yeah.
And it's not possible until they've learned the form and they own the form and they've done some of the preliminary clearing work. Their habits are up to a certain level. Now we can start to build a second tier of training where I want to train people in those Taoist arts in a practical way.
Yeah. Oh, it's a great vision, man. I love that. And you just hit on a thread that I really like thinking about, and it's one that you and I have shared before, which is I think when you learn some of this knowledge, some of the Chinese medicine or Ayurveda, there are people that you're going to help, and I think I go through phases of this, and you have too, but sometimes the medicine can help you if you're depleted, just to bring you to breaking even. It'll bring you to a level place. Maybe you're not excelling, but it'll bring you back to baseline. And then that's with clients and myself. And then there's this whole other layer when you're doing really well. And it's how do I accentuate and amplify what is already happening? And I think that's where you and I have always been sort of interested, is that ideally we want to stay below the depletion line if we can and see what we can play with in those upper levels, right? How much can we push up and amplify and exemplify what we are and what we're doing? And I think that's a really cool thing to think about, because I think people are always thinking like, oh, like I feel fine, right? I don't need it because I feel fine. People that are depleted are like, I definitely need help, and they'll come for Chinese medicine or some kind of help and support. So I feel like the depleted people can actually get on the path easier because they're depleted. They actually have somewhere to go. But that apathy, that middle ground of, I feel fine, so why do anything? I think that's a real key distinction that people have to keep in mind, is like, even if you feel fine and nothing's technically wrong, there's a level you can go that's up. You can push yourself a little bit more. And when I shared with you, at the most fundamental level, like why I studied Chinese medicine and Kung Fu was because it was in this reality, that's the closest thing to becoming superhuman. It's the closest edge I felt like that could be superhero-like, right? I'm not going to be able to fly. I'm not going to be able to, or at least not yet. Who knows what tonic herbs will bring in the next 50 years. But yeah, man, like Do you think that people are hip to that idea that, yes, if I'm depleted, like, okay, it'll bring me to baseline, but do you think people get that there's another level up in terms of expanding, or is that something you have to explain to people?
No, I think there's a negative way to approach it and there's a positive way to approach it. So then in the negative way, and I really learned this from my mother, watching her slowly deteriorate over many, many years, like 10 years, is that most people that think, I just want to do whatever I'm doing and then I'll die someday. I'm going to die anyway.
Right.
Okay, so hear this one, bro. This one has like been so potent for me. It's like what those people are not consciously in touch with, much like an addict, is that there will be a long, slow deterioration of pain, suffering, of loss of dignity, of loss of clarity of consciousness. Yep. And not only will they suffer that loss of dignity, that loss of freedom, that loss of mobility, but they will place a burden on all those around them. And as their mind fails in the pain of their body deteriorating, as they keep doing what they've been doing, they're not only going to suffer, they're going to make other people suffer.
Yeah, it's very true.
And I believe if most people could somehow be made aware of the sum total of that suffering they've transmitted, the loss of dignity they've experienced, if you could give them an experience or a preview of that, like a near-death experience where they actually felt it, they would change right now.
Yeah.
They would be willing to do whatever it takes to not deteriorate like that. But the illusion is everyone's going to get everything causes cancer and everything has preservatives and they're just like, fuck it all, I'm not going to do anything because you know there's too much and it's bullshit, right?
Yeah.
Well, they're just not in touch with that reality. So the other side of it is like, what would be, like, one of the things I say in my enrollment calls is I ask them, how many hours a day are you losing to distraction, overwhelm, and fatigue? And even in high-performing entrepreneurs, it's like 2 to 3 hours.
Yeah.
When they add it all up.
Yeah.
And then I say, okay, what is an hour of your time worth? How do you bill people?
Right.
And then we just do a little math, and they're like, holy shit, I'm losing $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 a month. I'm losing $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 a year.
Right.
And then, okay, so that's great. That's money. A lot of people get that.
Right.
But then, like, so back to your question. If you were to incorporate some tonic herbs, if you were to learn some breathing practices, if you were to do Tai Chi, if you were to have a more healed heart around trauma and feel more comfortable in your own skin, what would be possible in your life? And
that's a damn good question.
That's the way. I think that's the way to inspire people into, and you know, from a deeper perspective, I believe when people are living their life at that above just surviving, that's when the world's problems start to get solved.
Yeah, I agree, man. Yeah, hence why I asked the question. And it sort of, as you were talking, it sort of brings me to my kind of this last thread I want to touch on with you, is that, you know, you've tossed around the word virtue for many years and talking about, in very positive context, the virtue of people being virtuous in their dealings. And is there a way you conceptualize, because I think I'm curious about this because you're working with entrepreneurs, you're working with large scale businesses in that regard. And what we see in modern times right now is there's a lot of dishonesty amongst politicians in policy, media. There's so much what you would call non-virtue. And nowadays people are starting, I mean, there's definitely, it's always been there, right? People always appreciate integrity and whatnot, but it seems like the currency for that is so much more, there's so much more at stake nowadays for people to be clear in their communication, upfront and transparent about business practices, about their personal proclivities in business, you know, knowing who to hire out, not to screw someone over. I know it's valuable, but I want to hear, what value do you think it really has nowadays in relation to what you're seeing in the world? Just this basically integrity of character and kind of guiding people towards more virtuous emotions.
Yeah. So I had a session with this guy, Jim House, around the book and the concepts of the book. I had these 2 VIP days. It was really potent and powerful. And one of the ideas that he teased out of me that is going to go in the book is the difference between virtue. From my understanding of studying Chinese language and Taoism and talking to teacher Yang and other Taoist teachers, is that Chinese word for virtue brings to light the distinction between morality and hygiene.
Ooh.
Morality and hygiene, and I'll break it down for you. So morality is like, don't masturbate because God will punish you.
Right.
Don't do this because it's bad.
Mm-hmm.
There's no explanation. There's no logic. It's just a rule that you follow, because if you don't follow it, you will be judged.
And punished, right.
And punished. Hygiene is like, if we take the same concept, we go to hygiene, is like, if you masturbate chronically, you will deplete your neurotransmitters and you will be less happy, less functional, less compassionate, less patient. Mm-hmm. Hygienically, it doesn't make sense to overspend your sexual vitality.
Right.
Okay, from morality, I could say it's wrong to eat bad foods. Mm-hmm. But hygiene is going to say eventually, if you eat trans fats, your brain is going to be full of this inferior fat layer that's inflamed. You're going to have dementia. You're going to have more likely to have a stroke.
Right.
So to eat trans fats, it's not a moral problem. It's a hygienic problem.
Yeah.
So virtue, from my understanding, is hygienic in Taoist understanding. Mm-hmm. So to answer directly your question, if I build a company on lies, on false marketing, on mistreating my employees, it will come crashing down.
Yes, and it does.
And even if it doesn't, my marriage and my stress level from not telling the truth and from having to lie, there'll be nowhere in my life that I can authentically be myself. So even if my business is good for 10 years, I'm going to suffer on a neurotransmitter basis.
Yeah.
So for me, in the teaching of the 6 gates of the pathway of power, they're all hygienic. They're all about the result. Mm-hmm. The cost of not listening is going to end up leading to our suffering or our loss of result in the world.
Yeah.
So for me, virtue is about hygiene.
I like that distinction. That's a great distinction, because I think that's a big one, man. That morality piece, as you were talking about it, that's the Judeo-Christian, I'm being judged, so fuck everything, and I'm not going to deal with anything because I don't want someone looking at me and judging me. And that's about where it begins and ends, and people are resentful and push back to things that could potentially be quote-unquote good in their life. And if it's hygienic, like you're saying, that's a much more positive filter in terms of, here's what you're losing. Here's what will go away, and I think it also opens the door what's possible, what could be happening here. But I think that's a question I ask myself for my own personal development, and then I'm asking, to people that are in businesses too. I'm always amazed at how fraudulent and how criminal some of these things can happen in the world, and they do fall apart eventually. And getting people to realize, I guess, that integrity of character is a very valuable currency. It's real. It's important. And I'm just glad that you're doing that kind of work. I'm glad that you're getting people exposed to Chinese medicine, to the concepts of peak performance, to help adapt to stress, because I know your end goal is ultimately just to make the world a better place. Just get people in a more optimal state so they can be delivering their gifts, because we all have them. We just need help usually we need some help in delivering them.
Right. And I think, like, I don't know if it's the same for you, but when I really boil down to my deepest purpose and knowing on this planet, is that I love the earth. Yeah. I love the redwood trees and the rivers and the mountains and the animals. And my soul's contract, I feel like, if I were to know what it was, is to help the earth make it through the adolescence of humanity.
Yeah. Well said.
Because for me, if I have control over my reincarnation, when this planet there's no trees and we're all living in bases and domes with cybernetic implants, which we are headed there one way or another, that's partially going to exist.
Yep.
I'm not coming back here then.
Yeah.
When there's no more trees and there's no more animals and there's no more lakes and grass, then I'm done with this planet.
Yeah.
And so my deepest desire is to and so if I can just permit me to have this little existential exploration, if I go one step forward,
please.
I believe that the Taoist, the early Chinese scientists, the shamans, that the solutions to humanity's biggest problems are already existing in those texts and those approaches. And if they're used to guide science and research and technology, that we will develop it in a way that we actually survive, and we use our technology to undo some of the damage.
Yeah.
And so the example that I always give is that, just like, for example, we have this realization that a major problem is stress, and that stress comes from the hyperactivity of our sympathetic nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God, we need a way to balance the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. Guess what? The Taoists have a breathing technique for that. They have an entire form of thing called Tai Chi and qigong. What does it do? It balances the sympathetic and the parasympathetic.
Yep.
Now, they're going to figure out additional qualities of the human body.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're going to go to a drug or a surgery, and I'm going to be over here, and I'm going to say, guess what? There's a technique that's already exists that modulates that naturally.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to be able to go in to all the practices, and I'm going to be able to experiment. I'm going to be able to bring that forward to people that don't want to do the drugs, the surgery, or the implants.
Yeah.
So I feel like my faith is to keep the Taoist alive, the Taoist arts alive, the life skills, so that as I get into a position of greater influence, that I can guide politics, medicine, science in whatever way that God puts me in that position to do so.
Yeah.
So that's like my deepest truth around my purpose in life.
Oh, I love it, man. It's a beautiful sentiment too. I think I agree with you. The technological era where we're going, the state of the planet, there's lots of things that you're pointing to that I think are just on point in terms of how we're navigating and moving forward. And I'm the same way. I think you and I have had this conversation in the past where it's, this go round, I don't want a VR set attached to my head as a way to interface with reality. I'm not saying I wouldn't ever use one. Like I'm not, phobic and unrealistic, but I don't want it to be like, God, I would never, I thought, we're all trying to replicate what we already have. You guys are all trying to replicate virtual reality. I'm like, this reality is as virtual as it gets. Like the graphics are on point. It's,
Yep.
It's really nice here if we allow it to be, and we just have to, keep working towards creating something good. But, man, Kai, is there anything else, man, you want to parting words that you would like to give to the audience in terms of things we've touched on or anything in particular?
Yeah, I'll just end with some gratitude. Like one of the things I'm most grateful for right now is the primal resurgence that's happening as a counterpoint to the technological development. Like, this year, for the first time at the Paleo FX conference, there's a conversation around the fact that part of paleo culture was psychedelics.
Oh, wow.
And that there's this need to go back into these primal experiences, just like we know that the primal diet with no added has massive benefits. We know that intermittent fasting has all these benefits. We're going back to a more natural technology to stimulate our evolution from the inside out.
Yeah.
And so I would just say, for those of you listening to this, find a time every week, at least, if not every day, to find your primal nature, to be barefoot in the grass, to breathe deep, to get in some cold water, just jump in and jump out, cold showers, like throw a kettlebell around, swing a mace, wrestle with somebody, because your body and your emotions and your evolutionary capacity will be turned on by that contact with nature in a way that will prevent illness, will increase your capacity. So I'll just say, Gray, I'm looking forward to seeing you sometime soon and getting primal together. And I'm so proud of you for this podcast.
Thanks, man.
And when I look at your life, and knowing some of the things you've had to overcome and some of the doors that have been put up, the stop signs, I think about how it's directed you.
Yeah.
to study with Lillian and to do this kind of lifestyle medicine. And I think that maybe you already know or see that it's a gift.
Yeah, it's taken me a while. But
yeah,
I appreciate that, man, because it's good for me to hear, because it took me some years to get it. And I'm still getting it, but I appreciate that. Thank you, man. And the feeling is mutual, man. I love you, and I'm proud of what you're doing. the stuff that you're putting out and the content and the people that you're reaching is nothing but good stuff is going to come from it. And it already is. I can see it happening. It's unfolding. So Kai, the last piece with this then is just how can people track you, follow you, social media? How do you get your stuff out? Where can people find you?
Sure. So my personal Facebook page is Kai Van Bodhi, Facebook, / Kai Van Bodhi, VANBODHI. I have weekly lives on there. I'm doing one tonight on the power of 4, how to align ourselves with the forces of nature and the higher cycles. My website is pathwayofpower.com. There's a quiz on there about figuring out where you leak the most energy and what you can do to seal it up. Beautiful. And then the last piece I'll just say is like my current ask is like I'm working with men right now around turning our addictive nature and our mask that we wear, which is usually masturbation, alcohol, sugar, caffeine, and cannabis. I am supporting powerful men who have a really big purpose, and yet they know that they're escaping, they're numbing, and that it's jeopardizing their larger mission. Mm-hmm. I have a system of breath work and practices to get unplugged from porn and masturbation, to turn that into more vitality, more strength, more performance, and to just turn that addiction into a greater degree of primal power. So if you're hearing this and that's your man, or that's someone or it's you, just reach out directly and I will give you like a 90-minute call where we'll look at your vision, we'll look at what's in the way, and if we're fit to work together, we'll explore that. Otherwise, I'll give you a couple things you can start right away to get you back on track.
Beautiful, Kai. I love it, man. Well, thank you, Kai, for the time, for being here. It's always fun talking to you. We need to do it more. We need another man movie night here soon. So
totally, bro. And late down the line, when we're in person together, I'd really like to do an extended kombucha beer format and see where the cosmos takes us.
I will take you up on that for sure.
Yeah, it can be a bonus one. So.
Sounds good.
All right,
Art Amigo, thanks a lot, man.
Yep. Later, bro.